It was a regular morning at the downtown precinct. Officer Jake, known for his bad temper and prejudice, stood outside the station sipping his coffee. When a well-dressed black man walked up, asking for directions, Jake didn't even hesitate. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and shockingly spit right at the man's feet. The man calmly wiped his shoe, gave Jake a sharp look, and walked into the station without a word. Minutes later, the entire precinct was called to the briefing room for an important announcement. Jake strolled in, still smirking, until he saw him. The same man stood at the front, now in full uniform, as the new police chief. The room went silent. The room felt like it froze. Officer Jake's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a pale, shocked expression. He tried to blend into the crowd, hoping the new chief hadn't recognized him, but it was too late. The new police chief cleared his throat. "Good morning, officers. I'm Chief Anderson. I've been brought here to clean up this precinct, starting with addressing disrespect and racism within our ranks." His eyes locked onto Jake's. "Some of you may already have made an impression." Jake's heart pounded. The other officers exchanged glances, whispering. Chief Anderson paused, then added with a sharp tone, "I'll be conducting personal evaluations. We'll see who's fit to serve this community." Jake knew he was in deep trouble. After the meeting, Chief Anderson called a few officers into his office for one-on-one introductions. Jake tried to sneak out, but just as he reached the door, he heard his name. "Officer Jake, why don't you come in for a chat?" The room went quiet again. Jake swallowed hard and turned around, forcing a fake smile. As he walked into the chief's office, he felt the weight of every eye in the precinct on his back. Inside, Chief Anderson sat calmly behind his desk, motioning for Jake to sit. The door closed with a click, and the room felt even smaller. "I believe we had an interesting encounter outside," Chief Anderson began, his voice steady but sharp. Jake stammered, "I didn't know who you were, sir." Chief Anderson leaned forward. "Does it matter who I am? Is that how you treat people in this community?" Jake's face turned red. He knew there was no excuse. Jake fumbled for words, his confidence slipping away. I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." Chief Anderson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Sorry doesn't erase disrespect. You're supposed to protect this community, not spit on it." He paused, letting his words sink in. Jake sat in silence, staring at the floor. Then Chief Anderson continued, his voice firm. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll be placed under review, and I'll be watching everything you do. Any more signs of misconduct, and you're out. Do you understand?" Jake nodded quickly, his pride swallowed whole. "Yes, sir." Chief Anderson leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "Dismissed." Jake stood up, feeling the sting of humiliation heavier than any punishment he'd ever received. As he left the office, the other officers avoided his eyes, but everyone knew Officer Jake wasn't untouchable anymore. Over the next few weeks, the entire precinct felt the shift. Chief Anderson wasn't just talking, he was acting. He implemented new training sessions on community respect, accountability, and diversity. Officers who once turned a blind eye to misconduct now found themselves under scrutiny. But no one felt the pressure more than Jake. Every time he stepped onto the street, he knew Chief Anderson's eyes were on him. Every interaction with the public was being watched, by his peers, by the community, and most importantly, by the man he had disrespected. One day, while on patrol, Jake responded to a call about a minor car accident in a neighborhood he usually avoided. As he approached the scene, an elderly black woman stepped out of her car, clearly shaken. Jake's instinct was to brush it off, but something stopped him. Chief Anderson's words echoed in his mind. "Is that how you treat people in this community?" For the first time, Jake hesitated. Then, swallowing his pride, he softened his tone. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need any help?" The woman looked at him cautiously, surprised by the unexpected kindness. And for the first time in his career, Jake felt something unfamiliar. Respect wasn't just given, it had to be earned. Weeks passed, and the precinct's atmosphere continued to evolve under Chief Anderson's leadership. Officers began treating the community with more respect, realizing that the old ways wouldn't be tolerated anymore. But everyone kept a close eye on Jake, wondering if his recent change in behavior was genuine or just a front. One morning, the precinct received a call about a disturbance at a local park. Jake was assigned to respond. When he arrived, he saw a group of teenagers, mostly black, arguing loudly. Normally, Jake would have approached them with authority, ready to escalate the situation. But this time, he took a deep breath and walked over calmly. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. The teens looked at him skeptically, expecting the usual hostility, but when Jake listened patiently to their side of the story, something shifted. The argument was just a misunderstanding about a basketball game. Instead of issuing threats or citations, Jake helped them settle it peacefully and even stayed to watch them play for a few minutes. Word of this unexpected interaction spread quickly through the neighborhood and back to Chief Anderson. Later that day, Chief Anderson called Jake into his office again, but this time his tone was different. "I heard about what happened at the park," the chief said. "Good work." Jake blinked, surprised. "Thank you, sir." Chief Anderson studied him for a moment before adding, "Let's see if you can keep it up." Change doesn't happen overnight. Jake nodded, feeling something unfamiliar, pride that wasn't built on power, but on respect earned the right way. As the months rolled by, Jake's transformation became more noticeable, not just to Chief Anderson, but to the entire precinct and the community. He started volunteering for community outreach programs, mentoring young cadets, and even attending town hall meetings to hear concerns from the very people he once disrespected. But one day, Jake faced the ultimate test. A call came in about a suspected robbery at a corner store. When Jake arrived, he found a young black teenager being aggressively confronted by another officer, Officer Daniels, one of Jake's old friends, who still clung to the precinct's outdated mindset. Daniels had the kid pinned against the wall, shouting accusations without any real evidence. The boy looked terrified. Jake felt the old instincts rise, the urge to stay silent, to look the other way, but this time he didn't. "Daniels, back off," Jake said firmly, stepping between the officer and the boy. Daniels sneered. "What's gotten into you, Jake? You going soft?" Jake stood his ground. "We don't treat people like this anymore. You want to do things the right way, or you want to explain this to Chief Anderson." Daniels scoffed but eventually backed down, muttering under his breath as he walked away. Jake turned to the boy, offering a reassuring nod. "You're okay now? Let's get this sorted out." Later that evening, Jake found himself once again in Chief Anderson's office, but this time there was no tension, just mutual respect. "I heard what you did today," Chief Anderson said with a small smile. "Looks like you've finally learned what it means to wear that badge." Jake nodded, realizing that respect, both given and received, was more powerful than any authority he'd ever abused. Months turned into a year, and Jake's reputation had completely transformed. The same community that once feared and distrusted him now greeted him with nods and smiles. He wasn't just an officer anymore, he was a bridge between the precinct and the people it served. But the biggest moment came during the precinct's annual award ceremony. Officers, city officials, and community leaders gathered to recognize outstanding service. Jake sat in the back, clapping politely as others were honored, never expecting to hear his name. But then Chief Anderson stepped up to the podium. "This next award goes to someone who's shown that real change is possible," the chief began, his eyes scanning the room. "An officer who confronted his own biases, took accountability, and chose the harder path, the path of growth and respect." The room grew quiet. "Officer Jake, would you please come up here?" Jake froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he stood and made his way to the front, the entire room watching. As he approached, Chief Anderson extended his hand, a proud smile on his face. Jake shook it firmly, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about an award. It was about redemption. As he accepted the plaque, Jake turned to the crowd, his voice steady. "I didn't deserve respect when I started here. But I've learned that respect isn't given by a badge, it's earned through actions, and I'll keep earning it every day." The room erupted in applause. Even his former critics couldn't deny the man he had become. Jake looked over at Chief Anderson, who gave him a nod of approval. The same man he once disrespected had become his greatest mentor. And Jake? He was no longer just an officer. He was proof that people can change. After the ceremony, Jake stepped outside the precinct, the cool night air hitting his face as he reflected on how far he had come. The city lights flickered, but tonight they felt different, brighter somehow. As he walked to his car, he heard a familiar voice call out from behind. "Officer Jake." He turned to see the young teenager from the corner store incident months ago. The boy, now more confident, approached with a smile. "I just wanted to say, thanks. You could have ignored me that day, but you didn't," the teen said. "I'm thinking about joining the cadet program now. Thought you should know." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He nodded, his voice quiet but sincere. "You'd make a great officer, and if you ever need guidance, you know where to find me." The boy grinned and jogged off into the night, leaving Jake standing there, realizing that change wasn't just about him. It was about the lives he touched along the way. Back in his car, Jake glanced at his badge resting on the passenger seat. It wasn't just a symbol of authority anymore. It was a reminder of responsibility, growth, and the power of respect. As he drove off into the night, one thing was clear. Jake's story wasn't just about redemption. It was about the ripple effect of change, how one choice, one moment of accountability could transform not just a person, but an entire community. And that's a story worth telling. Years passed, and Jake's journey from a prejudiced officer to a respected leader became well known throughout the city. His transformation inspired other officers to reflect on their own behavior, leading to a cultural shift within the precinct that Chief Anderson had once only dreamed of. One day, the city announced that Chief Anderson would be retiring after a long, impactful career. The news sent ripples through the department. He had been the driving force behind its transformation. But the question on everyone's mind was, who would take his place? At the official retirement ceremony, the mayor stepped up to the podium, addressing the crowd of officers, city officials, and community members. Chief Anderson has left behind a legacy of integrity, accountability, and community trust. Finding someone to carry that torch wasn't easy, but the choice became clear. The room fell silent. The next chief of police will be someone who represents not just authority, but the very change this precinct stands for, someone who's shown that growth and redemption are possible. Jake, sitting in the audience, felt his heart race. Congratulations to Jake Thompson, the new chief of police. The room erupted in applause. Jake sat frozen for a moment, stunned. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet, walking to the stage as the weight of the moment sank in. Chief Anderson stood at the podium, waiting with a proud smile. As Jake shook his mentor's hand and turned to face the crowd, he took a deep breath. I stand here today not because I've always done the right thing, but because I learned from when I didn't. This badge represents service, respect, and responsibility. And as your new chief, I promise to uphold those values every single day. The applause echoed through the hall, but what mattered most to Jake was knowing he had earned every bit of it, not through power, but through change. Jake's first day as chief of police felt surreal. As he walked into the precinct in his new uniform, he could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but he also felt something else: hope. The officers who had once doubted him now looked to him with respect. There were whispers, yes, but this time they were whispers of admiration and curiosity about the changes Jake would bring. He gathered the team for a briefing, the familiar faces of his colleagues and new recruits filling the room. Chief Anderson, now retired, was in the front row, watching with a proud expression. "Good morning, everyone," Jake started, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "Today is a new chapter, not just for me, but for this entire precinct. We've been given a chance to rebuild trust in this community, and I don't take that lightly." He paused, looking around the room. "I know what it's like to make mistakes. I know what it feels like to fall short of the standard we're meant to uphold. But I also know that growth and accountability are possible. Together, we can create a force that the people trust and respect, a force that leads with integrity." Jake's words resonated with the officers. They had all seen his transformation, and now they understood he wasn't just the new chief, he was the embodiment of the change they needed. As the meeting ended and the officers filed out, Chief Anderson approached Jake. "You've come a long way, Jake. I'm proud of you," he said, shaking his hand one last time. Jake nodded, the weight of his mentor's approval feeling heavier than any title he could ever hold. "I'm ready, Chief. I won't let you down." As Chief Jake Thompson settled into his new role, he quickly realized that the real challenge wasn't in enforcing the law, it was in changing the culture within the department, and more importantly, within himself. In the beginning, some officers were resistant to the shift in leadership, uncomfortable with Jake's approach of transparency, empathy, and community involvement. But Jake knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. He started small, meeting with community leaders, holding town halls, and visiting neighborhoods that had long been distrustful of the police. One day, Jake visited a local high school, invited by a group of students who had been organizing peaceful protests against police violence. They had heard about his transformation and wanted to know if his leadership would really bring change. Standing before a group of skeptical teens, Jake shared his story, how he had once been part of the problem, how he'd been just like the officers they were protesting against. He didn't hide from his past. Instead, he owned it. "I've been where you are," Jake said. "I've made mistakes, and I've hurt people, but I'm here today to show you that people can change. I can change, and so can this department." The room was silent for a moment, and Jake felt the weight of their eyes on him. Then a young woman stood up. "If you really want to change things, start with us. Let us help you understand. Don't just talk to us. Listen." Jake nodded, his heart heavy, but his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't just there to give a speech, he was there to start a conversation. In the weeks that followed, Jake met with the students regularly, learning from their experiences, listening to their pain, and sharing his own journey. Slowly, walls began to come down, not just between Jake and the community, but within the precinct itself. Officers who once viewed Jake as an outsider started to see the value in his vision. 1 year into his tenure as chief, Jake stood before the same group of students at the high school. This time, when he spoke, he didn't just see skepticism in their eyes, he saw trust. "We've come a long way," Jake said, his voice full of gratitude. "And it's not just because of me, it's because we've listened, and we've worked together. That's the only way change happens, together." As Jake's approach to leadership continued to reshape the precinct, a turning point came when the city was rocked by a major crisis. A high-profile incident involving police misconduct in a neighboring district had sparked widespread protests, and tensions between the police and the community reached a boiling point. The media was relentless, the public was furious, and the pressure on law enforcement officers was immense. Jake knew this was the moment he had been preparing for. It was time to show the community that the changes he had worked so hard to implement were real, not just on paper. But it wasn't just about speeches or meetings, it was about action. The mayor requested a public address from the police department, asking Jake to step up and speak on behalf of law enforcement. He knew that what he said next would either help heal the divide or worsen the situation. As Jake stood before the crowd, cameras flashing and reporters ready to capture every word, he took a deep breath. His mind raced, but his heart was calm. This was no longer about the badge or the title. It was about restoring trust and showing accountability. "Good evening," Jake began, his voice strong yet compassionate. "What happened in the neighboring district was wrong. There is no excuse for police brutality, and I stand with the community in condemning those actions. But let me be clear, we are not all the same. This precinct has made mistakes, and I have made mistakes. But I will hold every officer in this department accountable. We owe it to the people we serve." The crowd was silent, waiting for him to continue. "I believe in the power of redemption. I believe that we can change, but we can't do it alone. We need the community's help to make this work. We need to listen, and we need to act with integrity every single day." Jake's words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of self-reflection and hard work. As he finished speaking, the tension in the air seemed to lessen, just a little. People in the crowd began to nod, and for the first time in weeks there was a glimmer of hope. The next day, protests continued, but they were no longer as fueled by anger. Instead, they became opportunities for dialogue. Jake and several officers walked alongside the protesters, listening to their concerns, answering questions, and showing that their commitment to change wasn't just a public relations stunt, it was a genuine effort to rebuild trust. For Jake, this was another turning point. The journey wasn't over, it never would be, but in that moment he knew they were on the right path. Months passed since the crisis, and Jake's leadership was starting to show real, tangible results. The department, once full of tension, now worked more closely with the community than ever before. He had proven that accountability and compassion could coexist, and that real change was possible when people were willing to listen and grow. But even as the precinct healed, Jake never stopped pushing for more. He introduced community policing programs, increased transparency in investigations, and worked to recruit a more diverse group of officers who reflected the community they served. One day, as Jake walked through the precinct, he saw a familiar face, a young officer named Officer Daniels, the one who had once resisted Jake's leadership and change. Daniels, who had been on the brink of leaving the force before Jake took over, now came up to him with a hesitant smile. "Chief, I just wanted to say..." "Thank you," Daniels said. "You made me realize that it's not about power or control. It's about serving the people with respect. I'm proud to be part of this team." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't anticipated. "I'm proud of you too, Daniels. This isn't just my change, it's ours." And that's when Jake realized this was more than just a success for him or for the department. It was a victory for everyone who had been part of the journey. Every officer, every community member who believed in change, every individual who made the choice to stand up and act. Jake's story wasn't just about redemption, it was about the power of collective growth. And in that moment, he knew the real work had only just begun, because the change wasn't just in the precinct, it was spreading throughout the city,